Hello, everybody, and welcome. So today I'm going to talk about Mr. Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor himself. This is a very disappointing story to me in a lot of different ways. It kind of touches on probably one of the worst parts about the military, and that's a lot of the bureaucracy and the people that run or are in charge of the military just doing weird shit. And what I mean by that is like the cover-ups specifically. For instance, like for here in Arizona, Pat Tillman, for the longest time, they didn't let anyone know that he was actually a friendly fire casualty. So this whole story really bugs me and irks me. I remember getting an early copy of Lone Survivor. Even before it came out, they sent out screeners, and this is when I was downloading stuff a lot. And I got a copy of it even before it hit the theaters. And like my first reaction was, I mean, it was an entertaining movie, but my first reaction to it was, so you're taking the word off this one guy about what really happened there. It seems a little fishy, because history is created by the winners, and if you're going off the record off one person, you don't really know what actually happened. And if you look at that his character throughout that movie, he was like the level-headed, altruistic dude in most situations, and it's just kind of like seems a little weird. So let me know what you think of this. I'm going to give myself a little window here, and we'll see what happened. But I knew this story was bullshit in some way or another, and we're going to hear it from the man himself.
They gave me some freaking media training and started sending me through all these schools to get me ready to start going on TV. And then they sent my ass to New York in a suit, pulled me out of my uniform, like, hey, here's your new uniform, put the suit on. Here's your agents. They gave me my lawyers, all my publishing, everything. They facilitated all of that.
Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So today we have a spicy one for you, all right? For those of you who haven't already seen, all right, there was a podcast recently with everybody's favorite Navy SEAL, Marcus Luttrell, where he said some very, very interesting things, to say the least, okay? Basically, what Luttrell has admitted to is that the United States Navy essentially fabricated pretty much all of Lone Survivor, and then told him they were going to write a book about it, wrote the book, handed it off to him with a bunch of publicists, lawyers, and all these things, and used him as a recruitment tool for the U.S. Navy. Wow. Now,
Here's what I thought happened. I thought maybe he came back with a bullshit story, and by the time they found out what really happened, they just kind of rolled with it, and they just didn't want to put a black eye on the Navy SEALs or the military at that particular moment, because we were doing a lot of unpopular things. And I thought that's what it was. I didn't know it was all this, if this is what truly happened.
so what I'm going to do first, so we actually can see what he said, and there's an entire podcast about it you guys can watch, but we took a bunch of clips, and the first one we took was from the recent video that Jameson Travels did, which he was the first one I saw put out a video about this, and when I saw this was shocked myself. But let's watch this first clip and get some reference to what we're going to be talking about.
I'm a little shocked.
Let's check this out.
I'm shocked at the whole
They gave
story.
me my lawyers, all my publishing, everything. They facilitated all of that. It was an assignment.
Yeah. Wow.
Bro, they gave me some freaking media training and started sending me through all these schools to get me.
I've never heard this from Marcus Luttrell. I'm not dunking on the guy. I watched his podcast and I hear the Navy
I'm subscribed to Jameson too. He's a really good guy, former Marine, and he's got a really solid opinion about most things. He's good to watch.
basically wrote the book and dumped it on him and then paraded him around. You got to see this to believe it. I'm not sure what I think here.
Ready to start going on TV. And then that came up, and that's when I first got so guys are probably going to know about it, because I was told to keep it top secret. And that might have lasted 2 weeks, bro.
So keep the book top secret. Now, I'll link to this whole podcast. So apparently, we know there was a ghostwriter on the cover, a writer for the book. Doesn't sound like he even knew the book was coming out. He got debriefed.
This is weird.
After he was picked up by, the
Really
Rangers.
weird.
And I guess they wrote the book for him?
All right. A lot of bold claims, a lot of really interesting stuff here. And myself, like Jameson, when I saw this, was like, wow, this is pretty nuts that he's actually saying this. But what I wanted to do was figure out, okay, one is what he's saying now true? Like, what's the truth? Okay, so now we have a bunch of different stories from the same person. okay, from different time periods. I want to know, one, is this true? But also, two, like, is this actually the first time he said all this? So I did a little digging, and I pulled up some clips to find out, no. Like, he already sort of admitted to this and has been talking about this for 4 or 5 years, okay?
Wow.
So we're also going to play the clips of those, compare them side by side, because they're not the same story, but it's not quite as, this podcast and these emissions are not quite as shocking as I think we all at first took, because he kind of already has been telling people this, all right? So before we move on, because what we're going to need to sort of like transpose these things next to each other, things he's saying now and the things he said in the past, because they aren't necessarily the same. There are some obvious discrepancies in what the truth is, but there is a lot of similarities. So actually I pulled these straight from the Joe Rogan podcast that Marcus Luttrell was on. So none of us should really be shocked, because that's like the biggest podcast in the world, and he was telling the same story. Like, I think these clips are from like 4 years ago. Okay, so let's check this clip out, and then we're going to talk about how these kind of stories differ and how they relate as we go forward. So let's watch this.
I just got out of the hospital and I was doing physical therapy at the team, and they called me up and they said, hey, we're going to declassify part of this operation, and we're going to put it out into a book. And I was like, okay. I didn't know what that meant. Well, then...
Listen, remember, I'm just a regular ground pounding Marine, so this is coming from like a large population or pool of people of, this is kind of this perspective I'm operating from. I'm not going to pretend like I haven't been through the training or the stuff that this guy's been through or anything like that, so I'm not hating on this guy at all. But I mean, honestly, man, I couldn't float a freaking lie, even if the government told me to.
They pulled me back up to the head sheds where we had this big meeting, and they assigned to me I was privileged enough to have the best lawyers, the best writers. Like, I interviewed with everybody until I found a fit. Like, I got to travel around. Like, when Patrick and I met, he came out to the house. My mother fell in love with him, so that's how we knew he was gonna. And I had to live with him. So I would actually wake up on Sunday or Monday morning and go into work, do a workup, fixing to deploy. And then on Fridays, I'd have to fly to Cape Cod, and I would sit with Patrick and tell him the story. And then Sunday night, I'd fly back.
Patrick is the guy you wrote.
Patrick Robinson, yeah.
He's the guy you wrote the
book.
Was,
yeah. Because my name wasn't in the book. It wasn't supposed to be anything like that. I was still operational.
All right, so as you can see, yeah, this was from years and years ago, and I mean, he straight up says on the Joe Rogan podcast, the Navy came to him while he was in the hospital and told him, we are declassifying this story and we are writing the book about it, okay? Then they hooked him up with all the best lawyers, the best ghostwriters, all these things.
Wow.
So what he just said in this recent podcast, like, he's already said almost all this.
This is crazy.
In the past, so it's really not that, it shouldn't be that shocking to anyone. Now, he goes way further in the new podcast into some of this. But it's interesting because I, like Jameson, thought, like, yeah, like, okay, so a ghostwriter just on behalf of the U.S. Navy wrote this and you had no clue about what was going on. They handed it to you. But as you saw here, 4 years ago, he talks about how him and Patrick Robinson, like, lived together.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a different story than him handing him a story and then him actually telling the guy what the story was from time to time so he could write it up. Those are completely two different tracks.
Down and wrote the book side by side together. Yeah. And all these things. So now we're coming into, like, which of these stories is actually true? Okay? Did you actually, were you completely involved, like telling the story to a ghostwriter? They're writing the story on behalf of what happened to you? Or, like, it's kind of what's being sort of referenced to now is that the U.S. Navy literally just dropped a book off in your lap and said, congrats, son, you're the Navy's new greatest recruitment tool. All right, and so we're going to try to figure out as we go forward which is which, right? And which is more likely. What I will say...
Figure it out for all of us, man.
Because the stories don't necessarily match exactly, obviously, right? But I think there's some interesting cues in body language that we can see from the Joe Rogan clips. And again, these are years and years ago to what we're seeing now, all right, in the most recent clips, all right? So in that last video we just saw, I kind of think what you see is there's a lot of, like, awkward pauses and sort of like attempts at recollection of events that may not have actually happened. So when people are trying to recall a fabricated story, Typically, it changes a little bit each time. Typically, again, there's pauses. They're trying to remember where they were supposed to be at in the story. Whereas in his his recent podcast, as you saw, and we'll watch some more clips, he seems very comfortable, very free-flowing, as if this is actually probably the real story that's come out. Okay. And again, I'm going to show another clip from his time on the Joe Rogan podcast that sort of demonstrates the same thing. Let's take a look at that.
You know, I watched the movie again last night. I watched it yesterday just to prepare myself, and
I haven't seen it. I never watched it all the way through. I know the director's cut. You know what I'm talking about?
yeah, no, yeah.
So it was.
I can imagine.
It's probably
There was
hard
something
for
to
him to
back it
watch
up to
because he
the
knows
book.
it's bullshit.
Right, so like that is kind of like super awkward, right? Where
Right.
He talks about how I've never even seen the movie.
Wow.
Because, you know,
That's weird.
I had that first time recollection all up here. It's like this weird posturing, like that again, just like doesn't seem to be in the natural flow state of when he's sort of
Seems weird.
opening his heart and like kind of telling the truth, like he is when he sits down with Rob O'Neill. All right. Now, especially if it's something. Now, I'm not saying this isn't a lived experience, right? But everybody knows the lone runner stories, right? Who knows what's true, what's not? But
Yeah.
it's starting to sort of shape up that most people think that, you know, Luttrell he wasn't in a gunfight at all. He abandoned his teammates. He ran away. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Yeah, it's called Operation Red Wing, and there's a lot of different takes on it, people that picked him up and those kinds of things. So a lot of the stuff is coming out. And that's the weird thing about some of these stories that people come up with. It's hard to cover them up because there's other people there. And there's a lot of people in the military that still have their integrity, and they're not willing to play this game. So,
Okay, but I will say if you're trying to recollect events from a story that you didn't actually live, that makes it a lot harder to stay consistent over time. And what we see here is an inconsistency over time, right? Where there's
House
obviously
of
kernels
lies.
of truth to this story, right? Even from years ago, because there's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences in the timeline of events and things like that, all right? Now, because again, he talks about in the Joe Rogan podcast, as a clip that we just saw, that, you know, again, he was completely integrated in the process. He lived with the ghostwriter, right? They wrote the book together. The ghostwriter knows his mom. That's why they chose all these things.
Yeah. They
then-
chose him, basically.
He's got a clip from the recent podcast where he says this. Let's watch.
And this is when it started for me, man. They're like, hey, as soon as you get back, man, it's on. Oh, we're sitting at the chow hall in Ramadi. One of the guys in my platoon goes, hey, man, there's a book out about your story. And it had the cover online. I didn't know what online was.
All right, so here he says that he's sitting in the chow hall in Ramadi, and a guy from his platoon tells him, hey, man, they wrote a book about you.
He doesn't know what online was. That sounds weird because is this like 2000, at least 5, 7, 8, something like that? I'd imagine. And I don't, that sounds weird.
And it's out on the internet right now. Like, this is the first time he ever even heard about this book. All right, so like, obviously there's some discrepancies in what the truth is. And what I will say again, being at that, he seems so much more comfortable, and I think he's like maybe at the point now where he's kind of just like, fuck it, I don't really care, I'm tired of living a lie. That he's probably telling the truth. Okay, so it seems to me like maybe what he was saying on Joe Rogan podcast back, while there is some similarities, not quite
Not the full
right?
truth.
It kind
Yeah.
of seems like the reality that the U.S. Navy wrote this book as basically a recruitment tool, which
Right.
Department of Defense does this kind of thing, guys.
Unfortunately.
Seems like it might be more likely the true story. And we're going to move into that next, talking about how he talks a bunch about having to have all this Navy top cover and meeting with big Navy brass and admirals and all these things along the process. Okay. So Jameson also talked about, or showed a clip where he talks about Admiral McGuire basically handing him this book and telling him he's the new Navy's greatest recruitment tool. So let's check a look at that clip.
Man, and so when I got back, I got to go hang out with Admiral McGuire over at Warcom. He was my shadow, my top cover.
What do they have to train you for? It's your story, right?
Yeah.
Train you for what? I guess he's got to read the book they wrote for him. That's what I'm getting from this.
That's hilarious.
So Admiral Guire drops a book in his lap and says, hey, son, here's your book. To train you, to coach you, to get the attorneys, the publicists. He didn't do that. I figured he was out of the Navy and somebody said, hey, you should write a book about this.
And is actually, like Jameson says there at the end, that he thought that, you know, the way this happened was Marcus Luttrell got out of the Navy. He wrote the book. He put it out himself, things like that. I kind of thought that was the case too. Now, granted, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, Luttrell is acknowledging that's not the case, but I myself didn't know that either. So hearing this was also kind of crazy, okay? But he does tell variants of this in both the stories, all right? So that he talks about having top brass and top cover sort of guide him along the way and provide him all these things in the Joe Rogan podcast. And then obviously talks here as well about, you know, the Navy brass basically just providing him everything to make him a new recruitment tool.
Right.
Okay. Now, for those of you who don't really realize how often the military and really the Pentagon, the Department of Defense do this, this is super normal. Like taking advantage of military tragedies, reframing them.
Hey everyone, big heads up. Paleo Valley's running a sale on
Sucks.
all their meat sticks right now. You can get 30 sticks for $36.
And then making Hollywood movies and books about them to try to sort of glamorize the whole thing and increase recruitment. Okay? That's what was obviously done with Lone Survivor. They didn't wait any time. Again, Luttrell said he was still in the hospital when they told him they were writing a book about this, okay? But here's a list, and this is a very, very short list, guys, of movies that the Pentagon has provided the budget for. Right, so take a look at all these.
Iron Man? Why?
And it's like ones you would have even
Fantasy.
expected, like Transformers and movies like this. Obviously, a ton of the war movies,
because there's
including
a
this
lot of
one,
military in that.
are sort of subsidized and paid for by the Pentagon to, again, boost recruitment, things like that. So, no, this is not rare. It's not surprising. But I do think it's kind of like a black eye and a stain on the way the military does things, and trying to take advantage of dead soldiers' lives and stories to sort of bolster recruitment numbers. And that's exactly what they did to Marcus, okay? So we're going to talk about two more things. What version of this story is actually true? And then we're going to talk about, like, who's the victim here, okay? Is Marcus Luttrell the victim, right? Is the Navy, big bad Navy, force him to do all these things? We're going to get into that because I think that's kind of important to talk about too, okay? Excuse me. So, what version of this is true? Well, one, it's hard to know because there's been so many different. Like this story has so many different versions to it. Okay, from the book to the movie to things Luttrell says himself to all the sort of third-party accounts about what actually happened with all this stuff. Okay. I will say, most likely, in my opinion, what he's saying here on the most recent podcast is probably the closest thing to the truth we've got. I think he's probably exhausted from sort of living this lie that he's lived for the last 20 years, okay? And even if it's kind of a forced lie by the U.S. Navy, okay? Now, I'm going to show another clip of him and Rob O'Neill from this podcast laughing and joking about how team guys lie and fabricate their stories and how about everybody shot Osama bin Laden and all these things. And we're going to talk about that here in a second as well. All right, so let's take a look at the clip.
Of course, that's team guy etiquette. Every team guy was the one that got rescued. Every team guy shot bin Laden.
Yep.
Right.
That's the way we do business. Now, if you got us on a witness stand and we
Wait a second. So every team guy lies about stuff at a bar unless we're on a witness stand?
What?
I mean, guys do yuck it up.
Yeah.
The fish get bigger. The women get hotter. I get it.
Sure.
Oh, I don't
got
know.
to come out with the truth, that's different.
All right, so
Not really, bro.
maybe it's SEAL culture to lie about everything.
No,
and, like, lie
it's
about your
not.
war stories.
It's
but
not.
it's not in special forces. It's so it's kind of a weird.
It's
like
not.
a weird.
Like everybody has their dumbass and douchebag in the group, but I mean they get rooted out and called out pretty easily. So, and you know, most of the time when you're the only, you know, badass in the group and you do everything right, and you know what I mean, you could kind of weed out, you know, when it's bullshit a lot of times, especially if you've, you know what I mean, you've heard these kind of stories before.
arrogant conversation that we have here, like talking about how team guys all lie about what they actually have done. I haven't seen that. Again, maybe this is a steel culture thing, maybe it's a time period thing, but when both of them are sitting there laughing about how team guys make up everything and laughing
not
about
good. It's integrity.
how their stories are probably made up themselves, yeah, it's a little it just feels like they're both kind of admitting to it all being bullshit to me, which is not great. Now, again, I think because of how comfortable he is here, laughing, joking, there's no like awkward, weird pauses or body language or anything like that, like there is in the older clips. I think this is probably just the truth, guys.
Yeah.
I think it's probably reality that, you know, whatever happened in that story, that the U.S. Navy immediately wanted to do damage control because, again, it wasn't just it wasn't just the team that got killed on the mountain. Obviously, Operation Red Wings had a ton of dudes killed from trying to recover those guys as well. Okay,
wow.
It was a huge black eye on the military and obviously the SEAL community as well. So,
from what I understand, the worst part about, well, like, there were a lot of bad parts about that Operation Red Wing story. But from what I understand, like when they did actually recover Marcus Luttrell, he had told them that the rest of the team was dead. And then when they, I guess they didn't find one of the team members till like 10 days later or something like that. And it looked like he'd only been dead for a day or two. So I don't know if that lessened their, you know, they weren't as fast to go look for him because they didn't think he was alive. But that would be really sad if that, you know, if he could have lived through that. You know what I'm saying? Based on, you know, what was said.
So trying to do damage control and turning that horrific event into a recruitment tool, that seems pretty likely to me. Okay.
It's dark.
And then the last thing we need to talk about is who's the victim here. And do I feel bad for Marcus Luttrell? Now, this is kind of an interesting...
I don't.
An interesting one to talk about, okay? So Marcus Luttrell was probably in his early 20s, okay? Has, you know, this horrible combat lived experience. Obviously, we don't know exactly what happened on that mountain, but we do know that there was Navy SEALs killed up there, right? And we do know all the lives lost in Operation Red Wings. That's a real thing. Okay,
yeah.
So I could sort of empathize with him, and again, not sympathize, but sort of empathize with him and understand at that time you have all this crazy shit happen. You're in the hospital, and Navy top brass, you know, like some generals or admirals come to you and tell you, like Jameson says, we're going to write a book about this, and, you know, you're going to be a hero to the nation and all these different things, like, you know, and you're just a...
All right, guys, I want to talk to you about something
skip it
today.
again.
I want to talk to you about your male hormonal health. Now,
you know, a mid-ranked, you know, tactical troop at the time. Yeah, I could sort of understand why he kind of just goes along with it. Again, he's still active duty. Just
young man.
Seems like the thing he's got to do.
Right.
And I've heard quite a few people that have weighed in on this sort of take the stance now that Marcus Luttrell is a victim in all this. Okay, by the way it was handled, and he was forced to go on this big
to get rich
Hollywood recruitment tour and turn in.
Did you like, you know, give some of your money to charity or anything like that if you knew it was all bullshit, man, and if you felt really bad about it? You know what I'm saying? The light comes out. I think the more people talk about whatever story and it's a lie, you know, you keep peeling back that onion, man, and it does come out. So
into this military personality on behalf of the Navy and all these things. Okay, I don't agree with that. Right? I don't think he's a victim here. I don't think
me
the Navy
either
is necessarily the bad guy. I think what the Navy did and what the Navy does, I don't agree with, or the military when it comes to this. But they're going to do what they're going to do. Okay. My biggest issue is not with necessarily it happening, but who profited off this? Well, I can tell you, Marcus Luttrell and his brother both profited massively and greatly, both financially, reputation. Right?
Here we go.
His brother is in Congress.
Oh,
so
I didn't know that. Did not know that.
If you're going to get massive financial and reputational gain
Yeah.
off of a story and potential fabricated story involving your teammates being killed and sort of riding
Which is dark.
that wave of lies.
It's really dark.
To millionaire status, you're not a victim, in my eyes. Okay.
Unless you gave all that money.
All of that money was donated to the wives and kids of the soldiers who were killed, which
My
I know
point.
it wasn't.
My point.
You're not a victim, and I
Right.
don't feel bad for you.
Right.
Okay? That's the reality of it, right?
Thank you.
The lies.
I love this guy.
Falsifying the story, the Navy using it all for recruitment, whatever, right? Like it's messed up, but it's nothing new. This happens all the time, right? Every famous war story's got a movie about it. But again,
Not the good ones
Luttrell
either.
Himself, and I don't have anything against the guy, but what I will say is sort of these news stories and where he's sort of posturing himself as a victim that was taken advantage of by the big bad Navy. I don't agree with that. Also, like this isn't the only book, right? He's also written other books and profited off of that reputational success the military provided him for even further financial gain, and he continues to do it. Okay, so again, no knock. You got to do what you got to do, provide for your family, but no, I'm not going to be somebody who comes out and says, "Oh, we should all feel bad for Marcus Luttrell."
No, me neither.
I don't think so. I don't think that's the case here. But I do think it's all very interesting. You know, I was in the middle of working on Operation Red Wings video, and saw these clips.
Right.
And was like, okay, this doesn't necessarily derail it because I'm going to be talking about Operation Red Wings itself, not so much like Marcus Luttrell in the video, the failures of that. But
bad situation.
You know, him coming out and basically just admitting that the entire thing was fabricated by the Navy,
that's special.
Put a little damper into having to rethink and reformat the video a little bit. So I wanted to put this one out first and talk about it. Give you guys my perspective, right? Because again, I thought initially when I saw these clips, how crazy is this? And then when I did a little digging and found out, oh, he's just kind of been admitting and talking about this for years. Not quite as shocking as we thought. But still, pretty messed up, right? And at some point, maybe we'll get the real version of this story. But, you know, it's changed 1,000 times already. So, yeah, that's going to do it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will catch you guys in the next one.
Okay, so, yeah. So that's the story. And like I said, it sounded fishy the first time I heard this silly-ass story. Tell me what you think. I love all these veteran channels. If you have any other channels that I should be looking at that I haven't, looked at, these guys really know how to talk evenly. And, I don't get into the politics of all this crap. I just, these are just veterans talking, man. So I appreciate your time. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Share, all that good stuff. Have a good day.